Hey, Rafael, how are you doing today?
Doing it great, Yvonne. How about you? What you up to?
Oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, trying to keep myself busy.
I'm sure you are.
Busy, busy, busy. We're all busy. So
Yep.
I don't know about you, but I'm so incredibly excited for our guest today.
I am too, Yvonne. I love him. I've been a big fan. I've learned from him. I'm so excited to speak with him today.
Me too. So guests, we are bringing you're in for a special treat. We've got Dr. Marcos Iglesias, and shocker, you're going to hear this because I am not editing it out. We discovered that this is our first visit with Dr. Iglesias on this podcast. Rafael and I can't believe it.
I can't believe it. Unbelievable. I thought for sure we had him on the show the first couple of seasons.
Me too. So great talking with him. He's a real treat to talk to, and you guys are going to be so pleased to hear Dr. Iglesias. So let's go talk to him now, shall we?
Let's do it.
Hello there, Rafael. How are you?
I am doing great, Yvonne. How about you? What you doing?
I am doing just a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You know how it goes.
You're keeping busy.
I am, and I am so excited to have Dr. Marcos Iglesias with us today. Hello, Marcos. How are you?
Good, Yvonne, Rafael. Good to see you. I'm doing well and happy to be here with you.
Thanks for joining us. This is not your first visit to our program, so thank you for returning and joining us for another conversation.
Well, did you know it actually is my first visit?
What?
And yes, it is. I know you've asked me several times. We've just never been able to make it happen. So
Well, how in the world is that possible?
I am
It feels
just thrilled.
well, thank you. It feels like we've done this a few times, doesn't it, Rafael?
It does. I would have assumed that we had as well. Yeah.
Holy cow. Well, I know that. So thank you so much. That makes it even better. So, wow, you threw me for a loop there. I have to collect my thoughts again. So a few things we want to make sure we address for our listeners. You recently made a move from the Travelers to AF Group. So congratulations on that.
Thank
You
you.
are Chief Medical Director. Is that right?
That's correct. Yes.
So just for a couple seconds, tell our listeners a little bit about AF Group and what you're up to there.
Sure. So I've had a wonderful career in workers' compensation in the insurance field, working for some amazing companies. And I left one to join another one. I've just been here since March, really trying to look at what's next for AF Group from a medical strategy perspective. I think AF Group is a wonderful company that puts people first, that has done a really nice job of managing claims and managing the medical aspect of a claim, especially a workers' compensation claim. But I sense a desire to go to the next step. How can we develop a medical strategy for the next 5 years? Something that is comprehensive, integrative, that focuses on that injured worker, their return to function, their return to work, of course, the betterment of their life, even during this time of an unfortunate circumstance, right? A workers' compensation claim is always a tough time for the injured worker. But what can we do to help them overcome some of the challenges that are present and leave them with something better than they've been exposed to?
Well, thank you for that introduction. So yes, we know you to be a huge advocate for the biopsychosocial model of care. That's something that we have spoken about
Sure.
over the many years that we've known each other. So we were just talking about, as we were getting ready to record, about how we keep needing to revisit the concept that, it's important to look at psychosocial barriers, make sure that we're paying attention to those early on in the process when we start to see those pop up. And so I know that your work will continue to focus on that. So how exciting. So today I'd like to talk about with Rafael and you a little bit. Let's dig in a little bit to that. We're going to, we invite so many folks to come talk to us on the program, and we're trying to get these different perspectives. So with you today, we want to dig into your clinical perspective, how clinicians operate within the workers' compensation system. And I know that, not only clinicians, but many folks that are new to the system quickly become frustrated with some of the complexities of workers' compensation and things like that. So I'm going to start off with there. So for younger clinicians who are just coming into the workers' compensation industry, do you have any advice or tips on how they can stay focused? We all think that this is amazing work, right? We love it. We actually enjoy the complexities, but what's some advice you might give to a younger clinician who's just coming into the industry to get them to understand the value of the work that we do?
No, that's a wonderful question, and it's got a lot of answers, but I want to maybe think of two or three. One of them is that, when we come to medicine or to a clinical occupation, most of us do it for many reasons. But one of those is the curiosity, the lifelong learning desire. And so I would actually emphasize the complexity of the management of an individual with a work-related injury, right? This is not easy. This is something that requires a lot of thought, it requires keen observation, it requires a lot of different skills, communication skills, obviously analytical skills, intellectual skills, but it really requires a systems approach. And to many clinicians, that's exciting. And they just don't understand, or we put it in maybe a negative form that tends to turn them away rather than bringing them in. So it's like, hey, clinician, hey, young doctor, hey, young nurse, PT, do you want to make a difference in someone's life? But this is going to be complex. This isn't going to be easy. You're going to need to bring in all of these things, but you can be very, very successful. I think that's really attractive. I think that's attractive to a young person who's idealistic, smart, and wants to put these skills to practice. So I wouldn't let that turn us away from wanting to bring in individuals. In fact, I'd use that very complexity to attract them. We also see, I think, especially today, obviously people that go into medicine, nursing, et cetera, tend to be altruistic, want to make a difference in people's lives. I don't think that's changed, but today's young people in general are more like that than we were in my generation. So it's emphasizing that. And that's, I think, where the psychosocial, the biopsychosocial model is so attractive. You're going to make a difference, not only in terms of the diagnosis, but in terms of the individual's life, getting them to a place where they're better off than they were before. So I would use those two things, and maybe a third one. A lot of younger individuals, and I was just talking to some interns just before we met here, they're really, really interested, and they're very attuned to and very good with a lot of new technology. And so they're bringing up AI. How can AI be used in the clinical world, in the administrative world? So I think maybe those three things, the technology, the lifelong learning and complexity of an injury, and the altruistic portion, maybe those three are what we need to be emphasizing to make this attractive. And I would say not just to clinicians, but to young people who may be interested in the insurance world in general.
I love that. That's a great answer. And, you touched on certainly things that Rafael and I talk about a lot. Rafael, any comments to what Dr. Iglesias said?
I cannot be cheering any louder, Dr. Iglesias. I love it. I love it because you're absolutely right. It's all of those components that make this exciting to be in. Makes it dynamic, always learning, always, adding yet another layer to what you thought you understood, and now it makes it even more interesting. So I couldn't agree more. Absolutely.
It's so funny. So many people that I've met over the years, why did you get into insurance? I would ask them, and I got this answer at least 4 or 5 times. So maybe it was a generation. Well, I didn't really know anything about insurance, but they offered a company car. And so I joined. And you've probably heard this too. Well, we need to do something better than the company car. And it's maybe these things that we just talked about.
Yeah, because it absolutely makes for an incredible career. fulfilling, rich, interesting, dynamic, always interested in, because it keeps up with law, medicine, technology. You've got to keep up with all of it. So you have to continue to learn and absorb. Absolutely.
Yeah. And workers' comp is even better because we have every jurisdiction being slightly different. So that makes it fun.
I was just going to say that. I think that, for me, I think that's what, you mentioned lifelong learning. That's definitely something that keeps me plugged in. But also, too, I think the challenge, I think you mentioned this, the challenge of putting it all together, right? It's very, I think, rewarding when you know that you're part of a team. And that's one of the things that we're always talking about in workers' compensation, that we have to get the different participants all on the same page with communication. That's another thing we emphasize. Communication is really essential to making everything work. So, I mean, I think that's one of the things that really keeps me interested, the challenge of seeing it all come together. And when it works well, it's really something else to see, right?
Yeah, no, that's great.
All right, let's see what else. Okay, so, Dr. Iglesias, you've done so many things in your industry. So let's talk about some of the things that you, like I said, you've been a long champion of the biopsychosocial model. What can you tell us in terms of anything that you're either seeing or thinking about currently that we need to be touching on? Like we were talking about in all of the things that I'm working on when it comes to education, we keep persistently and consistently talking about the need to look at psychosocial barriers, pay attention to them. What are you seeing, and what are you thinking that we need to be paying attention to?
No, we just need to keep evolving, keep pushing this, right? So we've been in this industry for a long time. When we started talking about this 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it was very tough. Nobody wanted to hear about it, or very few people did. That's changed. People want to hear about it now. What I've noticed over the last 2 or 3 years, and I think this is the focus we need right now, is to continue talking about that, but now trying to talk about the misconceptions, right? The misconceptions back then were psych means a psych claim, right? Or biopsychosocial means a psych claim. I think we got over a lot of that. I think now that we talk about psychosocial barriers, about the biopsychosocial model, about social determinants of health, those things are great, but I think we need a little bit more refinement in what we mean, because we've conflated all of these things, right? We've conflated clinical diagnoses and stress and psychosocial barriers and symptoms, and they're not all the same thing. And so over the last few years, I've talked a lot about a spectrum or a continuum of psychological well-being. And at any point in time, you and I can be anywhere along that continuum, from completely well to we're in crisis. But we also need to look at our claimants don't necessarily have a psychiatric disorder. They don't have a psychological symptom. They may have stress, which is normal, or they may just have a different way of thinking about the world, which is where psychosocial barriers are coming in. So in the last few years, where we've talked about mental health and behavioral health, because we've conflated all of those, we've tended to look for one answer. So Rafael, Yvonne, John, Mary, what's your solution to mental health or to the behavioral issues? And it's not just one thing, right? We need to understand, where is that individual? Do they need psychiatric help, or do they need coaching to overcome catastrophic thinking? Or do they need some stress management? Or do they need some sleep hygiene to sleep better? And all of those are on that spectrum, on that continuum, but they're very different, and they need different solutions. And because we've just accepted it, kind of not really thinking about it, here's our solution, and that may not work for most individuals, because we haven't thought about what it is within that continuum that we're trying to address. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense. And so one of the things that I have come across in again, I'm focused a lot on education and work educating the community. And one thing that I hear consistently from claims professionals is, to your point, they understand the need to look at these things, but they're not certain. And a lot of times they're very confused about when to pull the trigger, right? Sure. So, and I know that is going to depend on where they sit in terms of where they're managing claims and, the company that they're reporting to and whatnot. But do you have any, how would you address that? How can we help claims professionals have a better understanding of when, because again, it's not always the same. It's not when the claim begins, there's not really a magic bullet in terms of when is the right time. That's going to be different for each person, right? So how do we help the claims professionals understand when is the right time?
Yeah, well, one is just giving the message we've been giving about the importance of thinking psychosocially. Two now is more of a definition as to what exactly is the problem. And then what are the multitude of solutions that are available for that particular problem? And so I think we need to do a better job of compartmentalizing these problems and these solutions. And then how do we identify each one? Some of them we can identify right on day one, right? A past medical history of a psychiatric disorder, or we may not find out about it till later, but do we have a mechanism of investigating that, of evaluating that, of identifying that? Do we have a mechanism for identifying psychosocial risk factors, which are independent of the work-related injury? And we tend to have those right from the beginning. In fact, we have those before the injury happens. So that can be done in a number of ways. Clinicians can find those out by using a risk assessment tool like the Orbro or the Start Back tool or any other risk assessment tool. That could be adopted by a carrier as well, but it's a little bit more complicated. So can you identify individuals through your data by mining claim notes, by mining medical notes, by mining correspondence? Or do you teach either claim reps or nurses or someone even in the employer to identify some of these risk factors through a conversational through a conversation by asking certain questions? And once you identify someone, then what's your mechanism for offering that individual some non-medical help, which is what they need?
Great points, Ralph. I see your wheel spinning.
Oh my gosh, I love this. So, Dr. Iglesias, how do we do that in an environment where the statutes generally don't sort of call for that or don't allow for it? In some instances, outright, deny that kind of forethought, right? That kind of aggressiveness identification of these issues so that we can make it better and get to feeling better faster, if you will. How do we do that?
Well, again, remember, what are we trying to identify? Are we trying always to identify psychiatric illness, a diagnosis? No, right? We're a lot of times just trying to identify, how does Rafael think about his circumstances? Is he afraid, right? Is he afraid? And then why are you afraid? Are you afraid you're not going to go back to your job? You're not going to be able to, to care for your family. You're going to lose your job. So if I detect that you're afraid of something, hey, Rafael, are you afraid? And a very common one is, we're afraid of losing our job. Are you afraid of losing your job? Have you talked to your employer? So we can try to be in tune with the individual and then have a conversation about what it is that may be bothering them. That's not a diagnosis. I don't think that any regulatory body would have an issue with us trying to find barriers for an injured worker to function or to return to work. So we're not asking them necessarily for anything that, they, if they choose, they don't have to volunteer, but we're looking for, how can we help you? And I'm not asking you to give me a diagnosis. It's, are you afraid? Or why did you think this happened to you? Well, because John didn't put up the barrier at work, and so I slipped and fell. So now the problem, in addition to your low back pain, is that you may have perceived injustice. And so how do I help someone like you in a non-medical way? Because perceived injustice is not a diagnosis. It's not a DSM-5. It's not an ICD-10. It's just the way that Rafael or Marcos thinks, right? Catastrophic thinking. I tend to think the worst case scenario, right? But it's not just about my injury. So for example, if my boss says, I want to meet with you tomorrow, if I'm a catastrophizer, I'm thinking I'm getting fired tomorrow, right? On the other spectrum, side of the spectrum, if I'm not a catastrophizer, I might think, great, nothing of it, or maybe even I'm getting a promotion tomorrow, right? And when we have a work injury, we're going to catastrophize about our work injury. So if I detect that you're a catastrophizer, now there are ways that I can help you overcome your catastrophic thoughts about your injury, which in this case might be, hey, I'm never getting better. I know my Uncle Miguel had something like this. He's in a wheelchair now after 3 surgeries. He is hooked on these medications. He had to declare bankruptcy. His wife left them, and all because of the injury. And I'm going to be like him. That's a catastrophizer, right? And so how can I help that individual to take one step at a time to avoid the consequences of catastrophizing, which are going to be, a self-fulfilling prophecy. I am going to be as bad off as my Uncle Miguel because I believe it to be so.
Great points. So you're making me think of something that I think about often when we're talking about these issues, and that is, in our increasingly busy world that we live in, and with seems like every industry and every profession, every company looking for more with less, right? We're asked to do more things with the time that we have. I want you to comment on, specifically as it relates to clinicians, but also other workers' comp professionals, but particularly clinicians, because I think they bear a different kind of load when it comes to thinking about the injured worker, right? When we've got a heavy workload, and oftentimes we hear of too heavy claims loads, when it comes to claims professionals. How do they do that? How do they keep the space to be able to communicate better, to be on the lookout for the things like you just talked about?
Well, if you learn to do this well, it actually saves you time because you're not going to be as frustrated. And again, I go back to when I was first practicing. I didn't know these things, and it was very frustrating to take care of some individuals who just didn't get better. And I would just hit my head against the wall. Why isn't John improving? He's got a injury that is actually less severe than this other fellow, and he's back to work. And here I am 6 months later. I've sent them to PT. I've done this, and that, and he's not getting better. And that was emotionally frustrating. It took a lot of time. There were more reports to fill out. And it wasn't until I understood that, these psychosocial barriers were what I needed to pay attention to. And so I learned early on to establish, for example, it didn't matter who it was, but what do you like about your work, right? And then I could always come back to that later. Well, you told me you really enjoy the camaraderie at the shop. I'm really trying to help you get back there. Wouldn't you like to participate in that camaraderie again? So any hook that I could find that would help me focus that individual on their recovery, rather than hearing over and over again how bad they were, how their pain was horrible. I knew that, but reliving that was emotionally exhausting for me. It took more time, and of course it wasn't helpful for the individual. So it's figuring things out. What motivates people? How can I help them beyond the injury? But then you can also use some of the assessment tools that I mentioned earlier, and those don't need to take me time. A medical assistant could use that tool to do a quick risk assessment that I can then review. You can incorporate that into an intake as well, asking some of those questions that the patient, him or herself, can fill out before you see them. So there are technological ways of doing that. There are paper and pencil, and then there's also the conversation, the bedside manner that evolves to figure out, you can do this, Marcos, right? And it's going to actually be easier once you do that, because your life will be much more pleasant, and you'll feel more fulfilled because you've really helped someone.
So Rafael, throw the legal aspect in there, right?
Oh.
So, they have to do all these things, and they also have to deal with lawyers who sort of convolute the process. So ask Dr. Iglesias a few questions down that line.
I was just going to go there naturally. First, is it getting easier than it was 15, 20 years ago to go down that road with the patient today because of the environment that we live in that seems to be very different than it was 20 years ago? So that would be my first question. And then second, then how do you react to either the attorney or the adjuster who may be questioning you to say, Doc, what are you doing? This is about this, not about that, right? How do we deal with that in the system?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the second question. How do we deal with this? It's no, I'm not dealing with an ankle that walked into my office. I'm dealing with a person, right? And I want to understand who I am treating. One of my heroes in the history of medicine is Sir William Osler, who's a Canadian doctor, who was actually the founder of one of the founding professors of the Johns Hopkins University Medical School. And he really emphasizes, he didn't have the terminology of biopsychosocial, but he talked about the successful physician was the physician who treated the patient who had an illness rather than who treated an illness that a patient had, right? So I'm treating a whole person who has an injury, an illness, whatever. So from that perspective, I have no issues, and that's how I would put it. From the perspective of time and frustration and today's world, I'm actually excited about, and I'm excited about one thing. And if you've been to your doctor lately, they may or may not be using this technology yet, but ambient scribe technology is something that I'm really, really excited about. Unfortunately, and fortunately, over the last 10, 15, 20 years, there's been an emphasis on the use of electronic health, electronic medical records, which obviously gather a lot of data, but have also taken away from the interaction of a doctor with their patient. And I am not just a doctor, I'm a patient. And, I can tell you that the last few years have been very, very frustrating as a patient, sitting there answering questions that my doctor is asking me while he is in front of a computer, not looking at me and just concentrating on putting the data in and entering the data. With some of this ambient scribe technology, my last visit was great. He said, Marcos, you don't mind if I have my iPhone out and it's going to record everything we say and then just summarize it. You can look at the summary. And it was amazing because he was not in front of the computer. He was face to face with me, like I expected to, like I learned to practice medicine. And that was so exciting because now he can really see my face. He can ask me questions. And I would, if I were still practicing, I would see that as such a wonderful tool that then summarizes what we've just talked about, might pick up on some things that I wouldn't have written because I forgot immediately. And then, of course, the doctor does have to review it and make sure that, what they're signing is what actually happened. But to me, that's really exciting. And I think that's got the potential of helping doctors that, that are inclined to looking at psychosocial issues, because it's going to free them up from, the data gathering that we've expected them to do.
So I want to make sure I got that right. You said that was ambient scribe
technology, and it's very common now. It's not that expensive. In fact, it's not expensive, and it can be integrated into an EHR, and it will just, you as the clinician can format it beforehand, can create templates, etc. But it was amazing, and even during the physical exam, he would call out, normal S1, S2, and he would have he showed me afterwards the note was amazing. It just was like, wow, it picked up on all of this.
Marcos, you could almost be speaking about my experience. I've had the same doctor for a long time, and I began to notice with the medical records in my file, like, wow, the detail was amazing. And for those of us in our business, like this, what a gift to have a memory. I'm assuming that he was dictating afterwards. So after a couple of these visits, I went back to him, man, you've got the memory of, incredible, the stuff that you were, like, Ralph, I didn't recall any of that. All of that stuff, we're being recorded as we speak.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly that. So
Yeah.
that I can go back and not forget that you complained about this or that your back was hurting when you were running around, playing tennis or whatever. Wow, what a great tool to be able, and from a legal perspective, what a nice way to make sure, right, that everything that happened in there appropriately addressed, the concerns, that the claimant or whomever brought forth are taken care of. Like, what a great, amazing tool that's making it.
It's an amazing tool from that perspective, from the perspective of the doctor's administrative time. I mean,
Yes.
I don't have the statistics in front of me, but doctors typically spend 10 to 30 hours of administrative, primarily dictating every week. And I know a lot of doctors who will spend several hours at night. So they're trying to dictate or to input into the computer what happened that morning. And, I don't remember what I did 5 minutes ago in that much detail. So to your point, how much of this is actually accurate? What we were seeing in electronic medical records, because just because it's documented doesn't really mean it was accurate.
I loved it. I mean, I have learned to respect it and admire it exactly for those same reasons. Incredible. And so now it's almost an expectation, right? That all of these things are going to show up on my records, and accurately so, that it isn't like, because all of us would miss something, especially if you're seeing the number of folks or patients throughout the course of a day. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So Rafael, I know you're going to be like, oh man, but we need to wrap up with the next couple of questions because we're at time and it always happens so fast, but I'm going to give you one more shot. If there's any other things that are of the legal nature that you'd like to ask Dr. Iglesias before we take a little pivot.
So what's out there, doctor? And let's talk about technology, because it brings forth so many incredible opportunities and possibilities. But at the same token, right, there are dangers, as we're all learning, right? In the legal perspective, we're seeing lawyers lose jobs, get in trouble with courts, for misusing the new technology here. So give me some perspective from the medical side of the fence here, right? Good, bad, what's happening out there, and how can we be better about it?
Okay, so let me tell you something else good, and I think that's the impact that good artificial intelligence can have. There is a website for physicians called Open Evidence, and it's a chat GPT like. I'm sorry, I know I'm using a couple of different brands, but it's basically an artificial intelligence large language model specifically made for researching clinical issues. And I've used it several times. It's quite powerful, quite accurate, has the ability to give you citations that you can then look up. So again, very exciting from the perspective of making a clinician's job quicker, maybe even more accurate, right? So I think those two that we just talked about, the ambient technology, the artificial intelligence technology, are very exciting. But as with any technology, they can be abused, right? And I mentioned earlier, there are still some hallucinations, right? And in fact, when I was talking to my doctor and at that office visit, there was something in the record that we didn't talk about. So it did hallucinate on that. And, he picked it up, and of course he crossed it out and signed it. So it's still a tool, and we can't assume that just because we've recorded it, it's understood it and given us some output that it's going to be correct. So there's still a lot of onus, like in anything, right? If you sign it, you better have read it. That's no different than with the transcription. But I just want to make sure people understand these tools are still just tools that can make our jobs much more efficient. But it's still our responsibility. It's my responsibility to look at the citations and make sure that they're accurate and actual. if I'm going to use them for either for an article or in my clinical practice. So technology is wonderful, but it can be a double-edged sword if we don't use it properly.
Man, you're making me think of a whole other series of conversations we can have on the impact on neuroplasticity of using ChatGPT and other AI tools. I just read there's a new study out from MIT on that topic, so I have to save that for another day. I'm putting a pin in that. So a couple of questions I want to ask you before we pivot, Dr. Iglesias, is, so as you mentioned earlier when we got started, we've all had long, great careers in this wonderful industry, workers' compensation. What do you see is the single most important mindset shift that we still need to make in this industry? And chat a little bit about that.
I think this is fairly prevalent. I think that workers' compensation insurance, by and large, has been very successful at what it's done, at what we've done. We should feel very, very proud of it. But I think we should never rest on our laurels. And I think that is in anything in life, it's really one of the lessons that we need to pay attention to the most. Just because something has worked in the past doesn't mean it will continue to work. But likewise, just because something has not worked in the past doesn't mean that we shouldn't, dust it up and have another look at it and maybe modify it and try it. So it's a continuous improvement that I think we need. It's a continuous approach that looks at how can I improve what I've done. And I would think that is probably what we need to get better at. And I don't blame us, right? Again, we've been very successful creating a lot of different tools and a lot of different approaches that have helped us get here. But let's keep moving.
I love that. And you made me think of something I'm going to mention now, so you are one of the few recipients of the David J. DiPaolo Summa Cum Laude Award. So
it's right behind me.
I'm still scratching my head going, I can't believe we haven't had you on the podcast. But that was one of the things that David always said, right? That was one of the impetuses for the Cum Laude Awards, is to take stock in all the great things that are happening and what happens on a daily basis in workers' compensation. So thank you for mentioning that, because it is important. We tend to be super critical and always looking for, what's the answer? And it's not a one size fits all answer ever.
Right.
So the next thing I'm going to ask, and you kind of touched on it earlier, but, when you're thinking of and talking to the next generation of physicians, case managers, claims professionals, or any manner of clinicians in our industry, how do we keep them inspired? How do we keep them invested in wanting to make a difference in this wonderful industry of ours?
Well, and I think several groups, several conferences have done a really nice job of bringing this to light. And that is, let us see the successes, some of these very people that we've helped, right? To me, that's always the biggest motivation, is seeing individuals who've been hurt on the job and have overcome physical, mental, social barriers, issues, some of them huge, right? And we get to meet them. And we've done that at many conferences, you and I and all of us. Mm-hmm. And it's just always so inspiring to hear from them and to see them. And of course, we tend to see the worst of the worst, right, that have overcome. But we in our own practices see that, we see that every day. Even the person that, had a small laceration, and here we are, we just took their 2 stitches out, but they're going back to, to their normal life. That's a success. That's something to celebrate. Obviously not at the same level as somebody who's had a double amputation, but we're helping people all the time. And, just remember that you're doing this for those individuals.
Thank you. And I think you said it also. I like what you said about just because we've always done it a certain way, don't stop thinking about how we can do things better, more efficiently. And we certainly look to the younger folks to help us do that, right?
Yeah. Again, today I was meeting those interns, and they're in their early 20s, and I'm thinking, wow, how exciting! How exciting! This guy was talking about AI. This woman was talking about psychosocial barriers, and I'm going like, this is awesome, right? It took me how many decades to learn that, and this is these are people that are interning at an insurance company, and it's fabulous. I think we've got a bright future ahead. We need to get people like that involved, because the sky's the limit.
I love that. It's so true. I find myself in the same boat. Wow, how incredibly bright, intelligent, articulate, and so much further ahead than I was.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
It took me decades to learn it, figure it out, or at least absorb it enough that I think I understand.
Well, I mean, come on, let's be real. One of the benefits that the younger folks have that we didn't have is all of this information being accessible at your fingertips, right? It wasn't that way. That shows how old we are, right? That was not a thing when we were younger. So that is one benefit that they have on us, is that they at least have so much more accessibility to the information that we did.
That's true. That's very true.
Okay, Rafael, I'm going to give you one last chance. Anything else you'd like to ask Dr. Iglesias before I go to a more fun topic?
More fun than workers' comp?
I just recently attended graduation from the medical school here. What's happening in that world, right? How are we bringing up doctors today to enter the medical profession, to ultimately end up in comp, if you will, or other areas? What's happening at that level, Dr. Iglesias, right, that we can take away, and I think it follows some of what maybe you've already told us today, but is there anything new at that stage of their training that we're seeing changing today?
Everything's new. The technology, the knowledge, the medical advances, right? Again, I look at young doctors, and they are so much further ahead than I was when I was graduating, because of the state of medical knowledge, the state of technology, and that's not everything in medicine, right? It's still about the person, but I wouldn't have minded having a lot of those things back then. And it's just exciting. And I think, it's obviously a different generation, but I think we've done a good job of showing them the way while keeping, the person in the center. And again, even as I go back to the biopsychosocial model, that's something we talk about now. It's not something we talked about when I was training. So it's not just the technology, the knowledge. It's also, a more human approach, a more holistic approach, that I don't think we had when I was in school.
Yeah, same for me. It really wasn't until the 90s that I began to hear that at the local medical school, and I then brought it over to the legalese, and like you, it was hard at first. People didn't want to go there, but here we are, right? 30 plus years later, here we are.
Yeah, I can say that. So I have to do a shout out. My daughter recently graduated with her doctorate of physical therapy from University of South Florida.
Woo-hoo!
And I have enjoyed, she's graduated now, but, over the last 3 years, there were several times that we had an opportunity to chat about some of the crossover. And of course, I am secretly wishing that she's going to come over to the workers' compensation industry at some point. We'll see. All right. So real quickly, to wrap it up, Dr. Iglesias, we have to talk about wine. And for those that might not know, you have the prestigious, hopefully I'll get it right, the Diploma in Wines and Spirits. How do you refer to that?
Yeah, it's the WSET Diploma, Wine Spirit Education Trust. It's the level 4 diploma. It's a lot of fun. But it's part of that, that hunger for learning, that hunger for figuring things out. Like, why does this glass of wine taste the way it does? Where did it come from?
So I was gonna say, how do you maintain a balance? This is gonna satisfy my my resilience and all that stuff of, taking care of yourself. How do you balance the deeply complicated world of workers' compensation that we just spoke about to something so joyful and sensory as wine education? I mean, I'm just in awe of your attention to those details and how you've come to do that. So tell us how you managed to balance it all.
Oh, no, it's fun. I mean, it's just so much fun to have another interest. And, my approaches are very similar, in fact, because I love to educate. I love to train. I love to talk about, I love to make complex subjects simple. And, I find this a lot in wine consumers, right? They're intimidated by wine. They walk into a store and, they're confronted with several hundred, or I work at a store where we have about 8,000 bottles of wine, right? Different labels. And it's like completely overwhelming. Somebody goes to a restaurant, they're handed a wine list and like, I don't know what to order. It's embarrassing. I don't know what I like. I don't know what, my guests will like. So it's very, very intimidating. And I think, unfortunately, the wine world has made it somewhat intimidating and snobbish. And it doesn't have to be that way. So that's part of what I really enjoy, is actually, having somebody who doesn't know much about wine and help me find something that I may like. And so in talking to that individual, we can figure something out. And then it's so rewarding to tell them a little bit about the wine, have them come back and say, I really like that. Can you show me something maybe similar, but I want to try something different? And so that's so much fun. It's part of a holistic approach to helping someone, right? It's, because wine is so many things, but it's more than an alcoholic drink. It's culture. It's for many people heritage. It's also place. Some people, go to a nice wine estate when they're on vacation. They come back and they just had such a great time and they want to relive that. And so it's also about, the experiences, and it's about who you share that glass with. And so it's a social thing. It's just a wonderfully complex topic, which I just love to learn about.
I love that. Well, I haven't forgotten. We will have to talk about doing a virtual wine tasting, or maybe an in-person wine tasting sometime soon.
Perfect. Happy to do that.
Well, this has been so much fun. I really enjoyed having you on the show. I cannot believe this is your first time. It's
not your fault. It's been mine. I could never. No.
So, Ralph, any closing words?
I want to, I have said it to you, Dr. Iglesias, I think on a personal basis over the years, you are truly one of our inspirations. I have always known you to be a leader in this industry. Your educational efforts, second to none. I have personally learned a great deal about medical components of workers' compensation aspect of cases as a result of your time, your energy, and your effort in trying to educate many of us in the industry. So I really, really am grateful and appreciative for your time here, and always great to see you and spend time with you. You're just the best. Love you.
It's
man.
So good to see you guys, and likewise, I admire both of you, and I'm blessed to have known you for a very long time.
Well, thank you again. So I can't believe Rafael didn't spend 10 minutes telling you how much he loved you, because that's
because then you'll yell at me. You yell at me if I spend 10 minutes doing that.
No, I don't yell. All right, Dr. Iglesias, thanks again. And until we see you the next time, hasta luego.
Thank you both. Adios.
Adios.